Hello and welcome to the Forgeborn Finishing School. Casey, Kid, and Core here. We'll be analyzing Forgeborn battles to help take your game to the next level. Hey everyone, Casey, Kid, and Core here. Just want to start off with a quick reminder. The Kickstarter is live. You got a couple days left, so go out there. Go ahead and back it if you have not. If you haven't really looked at the tiers, I would highly recommend listening to recent Charge Plated podcast episode where they broke down a lot of the tiers, made their recommendation on what level to pledge at. I'm a little excited for the Dragon Shield sleeves. I'm not going to buy a bunch of them, but I do want to get some of them just to throw on the decks. I think that's a really, really cool extra add-on through the Pledge Manager that you can get. Today we are going to talk about Turn 0 deck analysis. So we talked about Turn 0 a lot, Greg, on this episode or on this channel. And essentially what we mean is everything that's up until the point of where you shuffle up and deal your hand. And so that does include deck construction as well, which we're not going to really cover in this episode per se. What we want to talk about is that deck analysis stage where you have 2 to 3 minutes where you sit down and you really take a look at your opponent's deck list and assess what your kind of issues could be and what you could come up against and start seeing. So I typically take a look at a couple of things in a variety, in a set order. The first thing is always Forgeborn abilities. And then after that, I'm going to look for cards, that are win conditions themselves. Everyone's pretty aware of Krogius. He's kind of the poster child, if you will, for win conditions in the game. I'm not going to say he's the best. He is one of the most reliable, actually. But there are a lot of them out there. Infernal Ritual is one, that is pretty well known. Quite a bit of them out there. But what you want to do in this stage of the game is kind of assess the target win turn of your opponent's deck. And we may get into some of these steps a little bit more in other episodes. We're going to continue on because we really want to delve into one step in particular for this one. And so the third one is kind of I call it surprise. So surprise cards. What you want to do is make note of any quick catch-up cards that can kind of get you off guard. Because when you notice the win cons, as you're playing through cycles 1 and 2, you're noticing, hey, did they get those win cons leveled up? And if they didn't, you could feel in a safe spot. So you also have to be aware of those cards like Energy Surge, Level 3 Drone, Level 3 Necromancer, Army Commander, and Enhance on the Forgeborn abilities if you miss those. That could kind of catch those things back up so that their win cons back on pace. Those... Go ahead.
And if you're seeing this later in the future, there are a lot more of these surprise catch-up cards that we're seeing released in set 3, so that's something to keep in mind as well. We're seeing more of those type of cards in future sets.
That's a great point. Last winter seems to have a lot of these kind of upgrade mechanics built in, and so there's a lot more things you're gonna have to keep an eye on. And really, I think that is one of the hallmarks of the Turn 0 deck analysis is picking out all those things that you need to earmark when they're played or take notes on when they're played to kind of keep up. And then the last one here that we're really going to delve into on this episode with a, kind of an eye on the sealed landscape versus constructed. And we'll talk those moments of why we think this is more important to keep an eye on in sealed versus constructed. But I call it combos and particulars. So really, they're very specific cards or combinations of cards that you need to keep an eye on. And so when we talk combos, we'll get down there a little bit later, but what it often means is one card is much better with the other. I'm not saying you need them both to initiate the combo, but one of those cards might be an always play in this person's deck. And then the second card might be we play this when we see the other card to get better value out of that other card. And so if you can keep an eye on those things and disincentivize your opponent from playing them at certain times of the game, you can get a pretty huge leg up. And in sealed, when we take value out of our opponent's plays, we get a lot more value back out of it because all of the plays in the game, yours and your opponent's, have less value than they would in constructed typically. And then particulars, we're going to spend a little bit of time on these value cards, or what I like to call escalating cards. And so we'll just jump into it with a buy faction. And so let's start here at Necrium. Greg, this is one of your favorite cards when Set Two came out. You love this card and have tried to get it running a couple of times. The reason it made my list here is because the the second part of the card is extremely valuable, but the first part of the card is very hard to hit. And so in sealed, if I can be cognizant of not letting a creature get down to 2 health and letting my opponent get full value out of Devour Soul, so when they play, they get a creature -2/-2, and then if that destroyed the creature, if this is met, they're going to get this Soul Gorger, which in Cycle 1 is a 3/6 with stealth that has that very powerful Spell Sprite-esque ability, giving it increased attack per spell. So in Constructed, if that comes out, that's a pretty decent value play. But I don't think it's always on par with the rest of the value plays in Constructed. But in Sealed, that is very potent. So we need to keep our eyes on our own creature's health, so much to the point where if they have a creature, that's a 5/3 in the lane, I'm not going to put a 3/7 in front of it, knowing that there's a chance next turn they're going to draw Soul Devourer. So I'm going to try to keep my eyes on those types of things and not put my creatures in bad places to end up with 2 or less health going into a next turn of a match or something like that. So that's just one way to kind of keep an eye out for things like that. Keeping in the same theme here with Necrim is the Death Current. My honest opinion, this might be one of the least value cards in Set 2. This is one of those cards I'm very unhappy to see in almost any deck I pull, unless it's got a very particular reason to want to gain health, even in small instances. And so what I don't want is to incentivize my player to get, or my opponent to get full value out of this card. So if that 2 damage could kill a creature, and they gain 2 health, and they give 2 creature in another lane where it would survive combat, that's getting a whole lot of value out of a not very good card. So this goes back to kind of stat tracking in the game. You don't want to leave a creature at 1 health while you have a creature opposing another creature within that 2 value threshold of an opposing trait, if that makes sense. So this is just where I go with Devour Soul kind of, and Death Current is I just really try to keep my eyes on those stats and disincentivize my opponent from playing these cards. You can't always do it, and sometimes it doesn't make sense, but if you're aware of it, you can really think that process through. We did throw Om Nom Nom up here because, in my opinion, this is like the constructed, better version of the card out there. Like the payoff isn't as good as Devour Soul, but you get that additional stat reduction, which makes it more reliable, more consistent. So I just wanted to throw what I think the optimal version of kind of these 3 cards are. And it's something you'd also want to watch out for. Not leave your creatures in a place to get full value out of an enemy's Om Nom Nom. All right, we'll move into Tempest. I'm going to talk Conflagrate here for 1 minute, Greg, before I pass it over to you, just because this is one card that I have been able to steal a ton of value out of, even in decks that don't have a lot of mages. And before I mentioned escalating cards, this is a prime example of what I call an escalating card. So its Cycle 1 or Level 1 ability, in my opinion, isn't that strong, especially in Sealed, where I don't have optimal mage set up or things like that. It reads, deal 2 damage to each of up to 2 different creatures and or players, and that damage is increased when I have more mages in play. If I see my opponent has this card, I'm going to do my best, again, to disincentivize them from playing it by ensuring I don't get creatures low enough for them to get a bunch of value out of this. If I have 2 creatures on the board with 2 health, and they haven't played Conflagrate yet, I'm monitoring the banish pile to make sure it's not out there, and they still have this in hand, I'm just setting myself up for a little bit of a bad turn there. But I can always come back from that one bad turn. But this card, I think, escalates immensely, right? Deal 3 damage to 3 different targets, plus damage for each mage. And at level 3, this thing's just an ender. 4 damage to 4 different targets, and even more damage for mages. So what we do is we really monitor in Cycle 1 what they could use this against us to disincentivize them from leveling it up, where it becomes a real problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so moving on to Lasher here. This is one of the cards that, you're not necessarily sad seeing it in a constructed deck, but I think this card has a lot more value in a sealed, and it's one of the cards I look for in a sealed or even pay attention to if an opponent has this. And the thing to keep in mind with the Lasher is that its deployability is based on its attack value. So you also need to pay attention to, its keywords, its forgeability, forge word that it has essentially. Here we have the raging on screen, but there are other ones out there that you would also want to pay attention to. Things like pyromantic could double hit, or arrogant, which is just huge damage. And so this is one that I keep a track of. It's also one that, like I said, I look for, and I look for my own as well as for my opponent. And then I'm just trying to keep track of where that is, how much damage it can do, and what I'm putting out there, to being like, can they put this out there, clear my creature, and now have a creature in the lane? That's a big swing in sealed environment. So I want to try to avoid that or mitigate the potential of that occurring. And then moving on to the next card here for Tempest is Fit of Rage. And we're going to go into a similar one in Utera. But the thing that when I'm looking at an opponent's deck turn 0 is, what are the cards that could end a game or cause a lot of problems? And as this scales up, it becomes, you're able to choose potentially more creatures with it. But even at level 1, this card can end a game in cycle 2 and cycle 3 by just giving a creature the attack damage and breakthrough to push through. So this is something I'm always trying to think of when I'm blocking creature in the later turn when I'm getting low on health is, can they just drop a level 1 Fit of Rage and overcome the health that I have on a creature to just push lethal damage? So something I'll keep in mind on that.
Yeah, we've seen quite a few sealed matches where it just comes down to creatures getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Who can get the biggest creature out there? And eventually you're asking for one to hit through. This is kind of the magic ability to hit through, right?
Yeah. And so very similar, moving over to some Utera cards that, looking out for is Feral Instinct. And again, similarly here, it's giving breakthrough and it's giving attack value at cycle, level 1 card, regardless of what creature you play it on. So again, this is a card that can end a game in the later cycles, but it's also a card that you don't want to incentivize them leveling it up because they'll get free plays off of it. And so if you can, Ryan, I think you said it best, being aggressive, if they have this in their deck, the potential of having it to disincentivize them from playing this card. Because, if you're playing aggressive and putting multiple creatures out there, they can either try to punch through and then take damage just to try to level it up, or they may go a different route. Because later rounds, being able to play free cards is also a huge advantage. So this card kind of scales up in its power more so than Fit of Rage, but even at level 1, I have to keep that into my mind that they can just add 3 attack and give creature a breakthrough to do lethal damage.
Yeah, these two cards are one of the easily the most forgotten about cards, and if you forget about them at the wrong time, you can lose a match.
Moving next, another card that can end games, and you have to be careful of. Their warriors are spliced through quite a bit in the different decks, but even the Packmaster alone by himself can be an issue. And again, depending on his different traits on him that he has, the more health that he has, he's going to be better because he'll be able to spike up damage faster, or more, I should say, not necessarily faster. You have to be careful of forge abilities that give him stealth or breakthrough. He can become a problem on his own in that case. But he's basically, if you see him on the field and your opponent has other warriors on the deck, you want to try to remove him as fast as possible to prevent that from ramping up and doing a bunch of damage. So just another one of those cards you want to, if you notice in their deck, take a closer look at the rest of the cards in their deck. Take a closer look at his forge word on there and see how big of a problem he's going to be, because it can be a big problem in sealed.
Yeah, moving into Aloyan. So we have Electronet here, which honestly, this is just a hallmark good card in about any deck you see it in. But we really, really want to disincentivize our opponents from playing it. And this is kind of one of those cards that in sealed, I have especially avoided giving my creatures minuscule buffs that really didn't matter. You got to be aware if this card's in your opponent's deck, if your buff isn't going to matter. Let's say I have a Spell Knight play, which is in quite a few of my decks. And level 1, I play a spell, I can tap it to give it 2 attack. If they have Electronet and it's not in their banish pile, I'm simply not doing it if it's not worth it. If it's not going to remove a creature, because that's a big risk you have to take. Because at the end of the day, when this gets to level 3, that's minus 15 attack, and it's still free. And I think, back to that comment, sealed matches, we end up seeing big creatures against big creatures just kind of beat against each other. If you've allowed them to level this up, at some point it's really gonna hurt you when they take 15 attack out of your biggest creature, and then they've just taken the board state. So this is one to really watch out for. And you'll see, if you're playing in person, feel free to ask your opponent to see their cards in their discard pile, or as we like to do in person. Once my turn's over, I'll show you my hand, and then I'll put it down in the banish pile. That's a very good tactic to have. But in person, feel free to ask to see those cards. And in TTS, right-click search. I'll do that after every match, or after every hand sometimes, to check that these cards see when they leave their opponent's hand, and then I know I'm safe for a couple turns to play something. The Tinker here. So this reminds me of a really fun story back when you crushed me in the finals of the first UC. So essentially I made a joke about having a Tinker in a deck that I couldn't have a Tinker in. But what the Tinker does is it kind of ramps up and destroys minions, right? And what we don't want to do, again, is incentivize them to play that. Especially, I threw this charge-plated Tinker in there as kind of a joke, but if you see a charge-plated Tinker, I promise you in Cycle 1, I'm just not going to play a minion. Because I don't want you to level up this 1/1. Because if I get you to level up this 1/1, now you have something that kills 2 minions, and it's only a 1/3. But you're only one step away. If I incentivize that by playing more minions, and you get full value out of it by killing minions, now I got to deal with a 24-26. And I asked for that in Cycle 1 and 2 by allowing you to upgrade this. If you upgrade this thing without getting full value out of it in Cycles 1 and 2, you're probably going to lose the match, right? So that's what we want to do, is just disincentivize these types of cards. So now let's jump into just a couple of combos we want to talk about. And there's a ton of combos out there, because we're not talking about the real huge whiz-bang combos that end matches, the Stitcher stitching in on top of minions and themselves and crazy stuff. We're not talking about those combos. We're talking about 2 cards that just synchronize very nicely with each other, and kind of help win the game. Those are the types of things you're going to see in sealed matches. Not extremely powerful combos, but good enough combinations to help you win games. And one of my favorite ones that I've been seeing in Battle for Whitefang Pass is any Shardback getting paired up with an Einslance Magus. I don't know if it's in the algorithm. I'm pretty confident it's not, but I swear, if you got a Shardback, they staple this Magus into the deck. And so the Einslance Magus in and of itself, I don't think is the strongest card. So at Cycle 1, you get to activate it to deal 1 damage to a creature. And then if it does that, gets Slay, deals 2 damage to the enemy player. It's good, but it's not mind-blowingly good. But now let's get the Shardback in play. If it's allowed to tap, deal 1 damage to the Shardback, then the Shardback does 2 damage to the entire enemy board. That's very powerful. But what often happens, and the reason why we're bringing this up here so we can talk about it, is that most of the time, your opponent, 50% of the time, is going to draw the Einslance Magus before the Shardback's ever even seen in their hand. Okay? And so we want to, again, disincentivize them from playing that. So I don't want to leave creatures at 1 health when I know they have this combination in the deck, or even 2 or less because of the Shardback. But if the first turn of the game they draw an Einslance Magus and I play a level 1 Krogius, they're just going to play the Einslance Magus, kill the Krogius, and now their Magus is leveled up. Or it's sitting on the board for when they eventually get the Shardback in the next hand or 2, right? So that's kind of the way I want to think about this, is these 2 cards aren't necessarily stapled together. One is probably an auto play at every chance they get, and that's the Shardback. The Einslance Magus is an opportune play that I want to, again, disincentivize my opponent from playing. So I think that's a fun combo that you're going to see in Battle for Whitefang Pass quite a bit. I've used it in Sealed, actually in multiple matches, so it is very good. That's just one I wanted to talk about. Greg, did you want to jump into this Aloyan one?
Yeah. This is the, just armor and the Forge Plate Yeti. And so You're not necessarily going to see these in the constructed scene as much. It could be more of like sealed opportunities that you want to watch out for. And so that if you know that they have a Forge Plate Yeti in their deck and they have multiple, different armor creatures out there, you may want to make sure that you remove the creature with armor in it before they have a chance to play the Forge Plated Yeti and take out one of your creatures. Or if you know that they have the Forge Plated Yeti and they have a creature with armor, um, prevent giving them a situation where they'll be able to drop the Forge Plate Yeti, and with the armor from the Yeti plus the armor from a creature is enough to take out one of your creatures or drastically change the board state. So you're you don't, so they don't play that Forge Plate Yeti and level it up and have it cause bigger issues later on. With some of the things that I've seen from set 3, I think there is more potential for this being more impactful in games. And so, again, something you want to keep in mind that they'll be able to, drop a Forge Plate Yeti and remove one of your creatures as it's 2-for-1 trade. And you want to avoid those.
Yeah, yeah. And the funny part about Forge Plate Yetis, I swear, this is like the math game that never ends. So when Forge Plate Yeti's in my opponent's deck, I'm always looking in my head at all the cards that they have that could have armor. And then, what's the next thing? That's the Forge Plate Yeti. What is the health of all my creatures? So yeah, that's a good one.
And the next set's not necessarily 2 cards that combo well together. If you see them in both of them in your opponent's deck, or even just one of them, you just want to keep in mind, and that is going to be Dendrify and the Shroud Thorn Slicer. And the thing to keep in mind with this, if you know that they have those in their deck, and this is like especially in cycle 1, if they drop a creature out there and maybe it has a deploy effect or it has something, there, you want to try to remove it before they have a chance to drop their Dendrify or Shroudstone Splicer and then just have an 8/8 breakthrough on the board, which is cycle 1 is very overpowering in a lot of cases against a lot of decks, especially in sealed environments. So if I know my opponent has one of these or both of these cards and they play a creature, my first incentivize is to try to remove that creature as soon as possible, or basically the next action, to avoid them playing this, because that's going to be much harder to deal with than whatever they put on the board or what they're going to put on the board. So it's just something to keep in mind. And we've kind of talked about these added value cards and escalating cards and these combos of things to look out for. But these are also things that you kind of also want to look for when you're looking at your sealed decks. Like if you know that these are things that are going to be a problem, they're probably going to be a problem for your opponent as well. And so, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. And again, there's a lot more of these escalating cards, a lot more of these small combos, these small synergies. The Dendrify, go back to that. I mean, like, how many times have you alone in a sealed match, turn 1 dropped an Oak Father, and the game was over because they cannot get board state back?
A lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I look. I mean, when I play sealed, I'm looking to go big early, or be able to go wide really well, or being able to do like ping removal, and I'm usually trying to do 2 of those 3 things. And so,
Yeah, and I think these cards kind of epitomize that, like the going big fast, and then also on the reverse end, if you have that ping removal, sometimes it's just a 2 damage thing, right? So like if their first card to play is an energy surge, drops a gizmo, you might not think much of that gizmo, but if you have a lasher that can deal 2 damage to the gizmo to remove it, you actually just saved yourself from a 10-10 with breakthrough because they were about to play Dendrify or Shroudthorn Splicer. So those are the kind of second and third order effects you have to really think about. Yeah, if their turn 1 plays a gizmo, and I know Dendrify's in their deck, I'm selling the farm to get rid of that thing if possible. So yeah, these are just some cards we've kind of wanted to go through. I said at the beginning, we talk about turn 0 a lot, especially in terms of deck analysis and deck construction. I truly believe that the 2 to 3 minutes you have to analyze your opponent's deck is what really makes the difference from the top tier players that play and than the rest. And so if you can kind of start to practice those skills and take notes, like notes are encouraged, and I think that helps immensely. Take notes of these cards that you're worried about, and then continue to remind yourself. When I play, it's probably annoying to my opponent, but like I kind of talk to myself, if you had devour a soul right now. That would be really bad for me. And I'm not doing it to gauge my opponent's reaction. I'm doing it to keep it fresh in my mind, because I don't take notes, and I probably should. So in my mind, I constantly play on loop all the cards I'm worried about. So just take some time, practice these things, and this is really how you get better at the game. And I think this is the most easily practiced part to get better at the game, is analyzing these decks and kind of going through the repercussions of playing the games. But that's all we have for today. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for attending this lesson of the Forgeborn Finishing School. If you liked this video, please subscribe, comment, or consider donating to our Patreon account. We look forward to our next lesson.